Volatility, volatility, volatility. The lowest bond market rates most have ever seen. Historic lows in the bond market. We'll talk about that. So much volatility that Jamie Dimon had a heart attack. Nothing to joke about, though I believe Mr. Hodge is not as sympathetic as I may be, judging by his Twitter response. We're going to talk coronavirus, the impacts there. A lot to get to. The Dems are down to Biden and Sanders. We'll talk Mike Bloomberg. I am Gerardo Del Real coming to you from Tejas, along with my co-host, the paranoid newsletter writer himself, Mr. Nick Hodge. This is episode 60 of Bizarro World. How is my favorite paranoid newsletter writer?
I learned this week that Tejas was Spanish for Texas, courtesy of Mike Bloomberg. And so just feeling just uber enlightened.
Nothing like rich Caucasian billionaires breaking it down a bit, right?
Hola, Gerardo.
Hola, Senor Hodge. All jokes aside, I called you my favorite paranoid newsletter writer. I am, of course, making reference to some comments that were made on Twitter by another newsletter writer in regards to your cancellation of your PDAC speech. I wanted to give you a moment to just opine if you cared to. If you don't, I'll give my 2 cents. I get the feeling that it's going to be a very similar response. But of course, the table is yours. The floor is yours if you'd like to opine.
You know, forgiveness and apologies are great moral cleansers. And I forgive Mickey for calling me a paranoid writer and saying that it was shameful that I didn't attend PDAC out of coronavirus fears. And also, Mickey, I apologize for saying that you had no loved ones as well to consider. Feeling really cleansed now. So, no, I think that attendance was down a couple of thousand people. Several companies did not go to PDAC. I don't regret my decision not to go since I made that decision. Multiple U.S. states have declared states of emergency. Multiple large conventions, corporate conferences, exhibitions, etc., have been canceled. Gosh, the airlines are offering free, fare changes. They're estimating that, internal domestic travel is way down. This thing has clearly impacted the market. The deaths are mounting, especially among old people. There was a cluster here in Washington. And so, there's a lot to talk about and we'll peel it back. I'm not going to talk forever, but I guess being in Washington gave me somewhat of a unique perspective in that it really has turned out to be ground zero for the U.S. Side of things for this coronavirus. And so I saw what was happening in real time. I could sense that it was bigger than they were letting on, that more people were clearly infected, and I wasn't getting separated during my family during a time like that, especially when states of emergency are being declared and quarantines are being used, et cetera. And so now they're showing up on the East Coast, as you know. Angel Publishing, which I run a division for, has their offices in Baltimore, Maryland. And it's sort of like, I feel like I've been living with coronavirus for a year already, but it's only been a couple of weeks. And it's just now showing up in, today in Maryland, the other day in New York State, for example. And so it's really early days for this. And I'm not, I called Mr. Moriarty out by name the other day in my letter. I'm not saying millions of people are going to die. I don't think, a third of the African continent is going to perish. But I do think there's going to be significant supply chain impacts, significant declines in expected revenue and earnings, some of which we're already seeing cut, the Visas and the MasterCards, and certainly like the airlines of the world, right? And clearly it's caused chaos in the markets. I don't think anybody has a really good handle on what's going on. Gold has moved like hundreds of dollars in a matter of days. And I know you've talked a lot about the coming volatility for, expect $50 moves in the gold. So you can talk about that. And a lot of deer in headlights out there from where I sit, just opens and clicks and buys, even stuff that should be working like coronavirus themed promotions and fear-based promotions about financial chaos and gold are doing well, and that's typical when we have the volatility that we're seeing now. People get sort of frozen, and I'm going to shut up now, I promise. But one thing I want to get out before we get into a broader discussion is that, like, you don't really have to act right now. If you were prepared and you sort of sense some of this coming, a portion of your portfolio hopefully is positioned to profit from the things that do well and are starting to do well now in an environment like this. And so, I had to catch myself a couple of times this week transferring money into certain accounts and getting ready to buy things. And I was like, you know what, Nick, like you're pretty well positioned. Like, you've seen this coming for a long time. Don't go, like moving around a bunch of money now. Like, keep some dry powder, because I'm not really sure how this is going to turn out over the coming weeks. And that's to both sides, right? That's to like the precious metals and the broader equity side, right? Because Disney's already shed $100, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's going to be some buying opportunities, I think, on the mainstream side of this as well. And so, anyway, that's some thoughts. We can go from there.
Yeah, let's. There were a couple of points there that I want to touch on. Mickey, of course, is somebody that both you and I are friendly with, so I thought the comment was an interesting comment made, and that is what it is. I think that, in fairness to Mickey, the comment was made before the escalation, and this speaks to you kind of seeing it in real time there in Washington. Before it escalated, now we're at the point where it's over 100,000 cases worldwide. The number of cases in New York, which of course is a dense concentration of people, has increased to 33. There's a cruise ship that's quarantined off the California coast. And the University of Washington announced that it will go ahead and shutter classrooms through March the 20th, according to the Washington Post. So there is definitely a reason to be concerned. You mentioned Mr. Moriarty, Bob Moriarty, and his call. And I thought the response he gave the gentleman that was interviewing him was appropriate. He was asked if he was being paranoid, and he said, well, I'm 73. I need to be paranoid. And I saw, I saw a chart earlier this week that showed, who's dying, basically. And Mr. Moriarty is absolutely correct, whether I agree or disagree. And I do disagree that, and I hope I'm right, that this is going to, kill off a third of the African continent. He should be worried. He is exactly the type of individual that should be prepared and cautious and paranoid, as the interviewer suggested, because that's who it's going after for the most part, right?
Oh, I mean, for sure. There was a lot of clicks to be had there, and you can see it in the broader media as well. But like you say, certainly hoping it doesn't turn out that bad. And I saw the same chart you saw, right? Mr. Moriarty, being as old as he is, right, is in the firmly in the demographic that is being most impacted by this. And I'm sure we're going to get to it, but the government, our government, the U.S. government, the Trump administration isn't doing any favors when it comes to the paranoia and the bad media that's surrounding this, because the response has been, it's been really bad. And not only has it been, really bad specifically to coronavirus, it's not doing Mr. Trump any favors on the electability front either, which we can unpack all that. But where do you want to go?
Let's, I want to get to the response. Let's get to the response. There have been several people, well-known people on Twitter. One, a reporter for Vice News. She had just recently returned from the center of the outbreak in Italy. And she explained that she whisked right through customs as fast as she's ever gone through customs, despite the fact that she explained that she was returning from the epicenter of the outbreak in Italy. No screening, no test, no further questions. Just go ahead and go. She is far from the only person that is making statements of this nature. This isn't going to get better anytime soon. It's going to get worse first. I know that the Senate just voted to approve an $8.3 billion package in emergency spending. It is beyond me. Absolutely not enough. And it is beyond me why we can't coordinate on a very basic level with our fucking customs agents at the border. This from an administration that still has kids locked up and separated from their parents at the border. We're able to do that pretty effectively when there's some private profits to be made, and yet we can't pull our heads out of our asses as a country to respond appropriately to this. I know you have opinions. I'm dying to hear them. You being in Washington State, I know that there's been a lot of criticism about how it's been handled there by the CDC as well. And frankly, there's been criticism from a lot of the states, California, New York, Washington State. All the places that are getting hit are complaining about the lack of coordination and competence coming from this administration, which, cut back a lot of the funding over a year ago for the group that's supposed to be responding to this. So thoughts on that, Nick?
Gosh, I got all kinds of thoughts, Gerardo.
Yeah. We'll talk markets in a minute, everybody, but this is bigger than markets, right? People are dying.
Yeah, people are dying for sure. So I'll start with a story that I read from a Kaiser nurse here in Washington who volunteered to be on a team that was treating an older gentleman who was known to be positively infected with COVID-19, who ended up dying. And she had all the protective gear that she was supposed to have as a nurse, but she still thought that she was infected. Came down with all the symptoms, and as a trained medical professional, thought that she herself was now positive for this novel coronavirus. Told her superiors, told the authorities, cannot get tested. The feds won't give her authority or permission to get herself tested and to clearly identify whether or not she's positive for the virus. And so one more quick story, and then I'll give you some thoughts. Here in Spokane, we had 6 people tested last Saturday, and they were supposed to give results on Monday. Well, Monday came in no results. Tuesday came in no results. Yesterday came in no results. Thursday came, and the Spokane Regional Health District still wasn't given results, and people were starting to get pretty angry. I myself called the Spokane Regional Health District to ask why the results were delayed. They probably shouldn't even have spoke to me, but the lady I got through to told me they had a
which speaks to the fuckery, right? Go ahead.
Right, exactly. So they had a shipping issue with the sample, they say. And there's a backup at the DOH, the Department of Health, and that's why they weren't able to get results. They did finally get results yesterday. They were all negative. And so no coronavirus in Spokane yet. But just think about the nurse story that I just told and the story that you told about the woman walking through customs, and tell me there aren't hundreds of people walking around the U.S. spreading this infection that aren't getting tested for, and the incubation period isn't even over for yet. So some of these people probably aren't even exhibiting symptoms, right? And that's why it's going to get worse before it gets better. Okay. Now on to the response.
Yep.
Last week we talked about how the response, how the government and how the populace respond to big events like this are sort of like what crystallizes how the trajectory forward after the fourth turning. And the response to this, in my mind, has been absolutely botched. Nobody knows how to get tested, like what should be their first call. Like you say, we can't organize with our border patrol. People are coming right through customs. And so it's the first real test for Trump, right? He hasn't had a big test, right? And he's failing. I mean, clearly there's no way to sugarcoat it. And I think a lot of people see that. And so I know we wanted to talk about the Democratic side of things, and I'm sure we can, but that's down to 2 people. And as that happened this week, Trump fell in the election betting odds, the most that I've seen him fall since I've been paying attention for the past 2 months or whatever to these betting odds. And one, sure, it's because Biden has emerged as the front runner on the Democratic side, but 2, I'm convinced it's the botched response to this coronavirus, and people don't think that he is equipped to lead, and frankly, he's not.
Where do I start with that? He absolutely is not. I want to speak to your point that this is the first time Trump has been tested. I would note that the missile strike in Iraq at the U.S. base, where tens of soldiers had.
Which they lied about.
That to me was the first test, and that was the response. They lied, and I believe the only reason that story did not become a bigger story is because of the fact that they were likely told and given orders, the soldiers and the families, to deal with it internally. And if you're seeking medical care from a government agency, whether it's the military or whoever it is, the last thing you're going to do is cut your nose to spite your face, right? And I think that's why that stayed quiet. But it spoke to the approach. The same approach was attempted with coronavirus. He went out to a rally and, not aware apparently that they record things in 2020 and it shows up in the media. He told the crowd that it was a hoax. And I know the context, the spin is going to be is that, and this is how he spun it. He said, no, I meant the way the Democrats are framing this is a hoax. Well, that's not how it was said, and that's not how it was framed. And I guarantee you that's not how his base received it. And so you're not going to be able to lie your way out of this when the administration and the various agencies are going to have to perform. Much like after Katrina, George Bush was not able to bullshit his way out of how incompetent the people he had put in charge were in the response to Katrina. And again, I don't want this to escalate. I would much rather it, there's some positive news out of China. The numbers are slowing down a bit. But if you look at the response that was required to slow things down in China and you compare it to what we're doing here, I'm not hopeful. I'm not optimistic.
Nope.
And yeah, I'll leave it at that. China just reported 143 new cases, 30 new deaths today. But that's a lower number than just a few weeks ago. That's really good news. However, South Korea now has 6,300 cases with 42 deaths. And again, you spoke to outside of the very human cost of the virus, especially amongst vulnerable older people around the world who have compromised immune systems. There's an infrastructure issue specifically in this country that, again, we just haven't addressed. We talked about this since this podcast began, about how we haven't invested in proper infrastructure to deal with something like this. We're nowhere close. If 20% of people end up wanting to get tested, we can't do it. I'll give you an example here in Round Rock in Texas, right outside of Austin, or Tejas, as Mr. Bloomberg.
Tejas.
Exactly, here in Tejas, as Mr. Bloomberg would say. One of the local hospitals, my wife was a director at a local hospital for several years. And, we reached out to friendlies at the hospital and said, what does that look like infrastructure wise? And they said, well, we have 12 beds, give or take 2 or 3, 12 beds where we could do a thorough, proper quarantine. Anything above that, we're fucked, basically. 12. Now, Round Rock is a city of 120,000 people. Austin has over 1 million. Yes, we have more than one hospital, but we don't have that many hospitals. And so, again, what happens if there's, we have South by Southwest, which is a big music, film, business festival here that goes on for weeks. People come from all over the world. That's not being canceled here in Austin. So what happens if all of a sudden we end up with 500 cases or 1,000 cases next week when this starts? We don't have the hospital infrastructure to deal with it. And again, these are very real questions that for the life of me, I can't understand why they aren't being asked. And when they are asked, why they are dismissed as if they were not important.
Because we're at a state where no one really critical thinks, and the state of the media is a circle jerk echo chamber where they read tweets online that are blatantly factually false. Like Bloomberg spending on the campaign is enough to give each American $1 million. And the chick reading it is giggling and Brian Williams is quoting it as Bible, right? It's like, they're just dumb as fuck, Gerardo.
And the whole network fact checked this. This was put up in a graphic. This wasn't something we all have we have moments, we have mental breaks, we have slips, we have, deer caught in headlights moments. But this wasn't something that just went through one person or two people. Whoever did the graphics and put it up, and they saw it. They saw it. This went out on national television. It's absolute. It's bizarro. It's a bizarro world out there. It is what it is. Should we talk markets for a little bit?
We should, because that horse is dead, and the media, the coronavirus doesn't fit into one of their partisan political narratives, and so they don't know how to handle it. And investigative journalism is dead, and that's why nobody's asking the questions. That's the answer to what you just asked.
It's a good answer, and it's very true. Despite the volatility this week, this is interesting. So we saw record lows, right, in the 10-year. It tumbled below 0.7%. Just a few days ago, we were in awe that we were not, you and I were not, because we've been expecting this. We didn't know what the Black Swan event would be, but we knew the bond market was going to be where the action was. And that certainly has been the case. But we were just all in awe about the fact that it had dropped below 1%, double digits. And here we are a few days later, and it dropped below 0.7%. First time ever. And so gold responded well. I think it closed at the 1665 level, if I'm not mistaken, give or take a few bucks. Bonds, the volatility is absolutely insane. Jeff Gundlach of the DoubleTree Fund was on CNBC earlier this week, touting gold and its future. Basically, it talked about the fact that his fund and several people that follow him, and this is big money now, were adding to existing positions. And so I've said for a very long time that a small amount of capital fleeing for safety would have a big effect on the gold price. And I think we're just getting started. And I apologize, it wasn't 1665. Gold closed at 1672 today, but the point remains the same. Small amounts of capital are going to have an outsized effect on gold. And you mentioned the volatility. Gold had an hour or 2 hour period today where it was $20 moves up and down every other minute. And so there's definitely a lot of scared capital. Scared capital will always go where it's treated best. It's not a coincidence that the Treasury market is doing what it's doing. I also don't think it's a coincidence that despite the volatility, the Dow was up 1.7% on the week. The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ rose 0.6% and 0.1% respectively. So I know it didn't feel that way this week, and I know it's coming off, big losses last week, but there does seem to be some stability to the sell-off, at least here in the U.S. Thoughts on that, Mr. Hodge? Does it feel the same way to you? I was surprised, to be honest with you. I didn't realize that the major indices had managed to close positive for the week.
It does not feel like that, especially because the swings were so wide, right? Multiple 1,000-point days in either direction, and it's easy to lose track when that happens. Where do I want to start? Let me start with the broad market, I guess. So the Dow, if you want to use the Dow, because that has the big point swings that everybody likes to point to, had both its best and worst days since 2008 in the past week. You want me to say that again?
Say it again. It's like when you're dating a really great, pretty bipolar chick and the sex is amazing. Go from one extreme to the other.
Is her name Tina?
There is no other option. What are you going to do? You call the bipolar girl when it hits the fan, right? And I joke, everybody, I'm happily married and I'm not speaking on my wife. I'm being funny and sarcastic and flippant. So don't be delicate flowers out there, everybody. Continue. My apologies, Nick. You were talking about the best and the worst day. Yeah. And somehow bipolar chicks popped into my head.
So the volatility is here. When you have the best and worst days since the last financial crisis, that's not normal, right? Like nope. the TSX shutting down last week, like that's out of the ordinary. The 10-year, as you say, going below 1, obviously that's out of the ordinary because it's never fucking happened before. But not only that, it just kept going lower, right? 8, 0.8, 0.7, 6, right? And then so, like you said today, it was a 0.6, right? And so falling very fast. Gold, similar thing. Gold has lost $100 and gained $100 in the past week and a day since February 27th. Went from over 1680 to 1560, and then back up to 1680, and now where you say today it's 1672. And I would note, I'm no technician, but this little 1 month chart I'm looking at shows me that we're looking at an inverse head and shoulders here, and gold needs to put up or shut up at the 1680-85 level pretty soon.
You got it.
I just happen to notice that right now.
You got it. Yep.
And well, that's about it. It's a lot of money flows. There's a lot of capital flowing around, looking for homes. Unprecedented events going on. Refinance applications I saw this week, mortgage refinance applications were up 224% year over year on the week. With 15-year rates, you can lock in at like 2.75%, 2.75%. Really, really cheap money for mortgages. And so there's a lot going on out there. I don't pretend to see it all, know it all, or understand it all, but those are some of the things I'm looking at and seeing.
Yeah, let's talk about mortgage rates versus real rates, right? The 30-year continues to be the 30-year fixed if you're looking for a mortgage. And I'm speaking from experience here because I have several properties and a couple of those properties I'm looking to refinance because the rates are so low. However, the spread between rates in the 10-year, which is at 0.7 something, and rates for borrowers are not what they should be. The 30-year right now, it's at 1.295%. If you have excellent credit, you're borrowing at 3 or 3.25%.
3%.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I see the White House hinting on my screen here. They're hinting at possible economic stimulus. I know this won't happen because it's stock market and bankers before everyone else, but it would be nice if the administration reached out to the banks and mandated or strongly encouraged the lending to be on par with what real rates are now, because it's not translating into the mortgage market. Yes, rates are coming down, but not at the pace that they're coming down in the Treasury market.
No, and I text you a text my godfather / uncle sent me this week, who's been in the mortgage industry for 25 years. And so I've been talking to him, and yeah, there's a discrepancy there, certainly with like credit card rates as well, right? Which are much, much, much higher. And so I'm not sure what the administration can do, but I've heard, last week we were talking about like a stimulus to buy stocks, right? Like the tax cut for owning stocks. And now I've heard about like direct stimulus. We're talking about helicopter money again. And at the same time, you wonder if people are going to be too scared to buy their first house anyway. So like you say, it's only going to really flow to the bottom line of those that already have houses and decent credit, right? But I'm not a credit expert, so I'd be interested in finding someone who can explain why those Treasury rates are falling so fast and why the mortgage rates don't fall commensurately with them.
I would love to have an expert come on and brief us. I am by far no expert, but I can tell you that behind the scenes, I suspect, and this goes back to what I said was going to be the 4-letter word that was going to dominate 2020, repo, R-E-P-O. I suspect that the Fed's biggest fear is another spike in short-term rates, which is why, and we haven't even talked about this. This is, this speaks to the volatility this week, a 50 basis point cut by the Fed. I believe that was inspired by the behind the scenes action in the bond market. Overnight lending, banks are not trusting other banks to lend. The Fed is having to step in. I believe it's stepping in to keep those short-term rates low, because if we have another spike from 2 to 10% and it's not contained in a day the way it was last time amidst this coronavirus panic, it's going to be a clear sign to everybody that central bankers have lost control. We know that's the direction it's going in, but right now I believe there's still some faith that the Fed here in the U.S. can pacify the markets with record stimulus, which is what I think is coming. I think, again, it speaks to just how crazy the times are, that there was an emergency cut, 50 basis point cut, and it took us, nearly 30 minutes to get into it. That was just earlier this week. And now the betting favorites say that There's likely to be possibly
another one in March. Yeah.
Another one in March on the 18th. They're saying maybe another 3/4 of a point on top of the 0.5 that was just cut. We're talking potentially.
I thought I was reading it wrong.
It's insane. I had to triple check it. I mean, it's truly unprecedented what is going on. And I think your advice for people to keep some powder dry is wise. I would absolutely encourage anybody out there that's got property. If you have an interest rate more than 4.25% on anything, and your credit's all right, reach out to a mortgage professional and see what rates look like and see if there's an opportunity there. Because again, these rates are historic lows. I mean, it's madness.
Agree.
All right, let's talk about the Dems. We're down to 2, Biden and Sanders.
You're forgetting there's 3. There's 3.
Who's the third?
Tulsi's still in, Gerardo. Tulsi is still in.
Like I was saying, there's 2. So we have Mr. Biden and we have Mr. Sanders. We said at the very beginning of this election cycle that if Sanders emerged as the likely candidate, the Democrats, forget the Republicans, the Democrats would do everything in their power to make sure that didn't happen. And oh man, did the endorsements all come in on cue the morning of Super Tuesday and the night before for Mr. Biden. That was something, huh?
It all fell into order too quickly and too perfectly for it not to have been orchestrated from someone or some entity higher up, right? Klobuchar out, Buttigieg out and endorsing Biden, right? Taken down. Sanders was supposed to win Tejas, man, and he ended up losing to Biden.
After Beto endorsed Biden, yep.
That's right. Beto came out and endorsed Biden as well. And so you saw, I'll go talk about the betting markets again, where Bernie was the clear favorite in like a matter of 36 hours. And I can pull it up real quick to see what Biden is at now. But in a matter of like 36 hours, Sanders went from 50% plus favorite to Biden. Biden, I'm looking at it right now, is an 86.7% favorite to win the Democratic nomination. And Bernie Sanders is 7.8%. When less than a week ago, Bernie Sanders was the majority. And it's just as you say, everybody bowed out and endorsed him just in time. So Mr. Sanders couldn't cement a far enough lead that he could not be called. And there's all sorts of infighting that has emerged around this. I know one thing I wanted to talk about was Donna Brazile, right?
Go to hell.
Go to hell, Donna Brazile said. So she's Donna Brazile is a Democratic strategist, has been for a long time. And she was on a news show this week, and the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee said what we just said. Y'all guys just fix this in favor of Biden to squash Bernie's chances of winning. And Donna Brazile said, "You can go to hell. Stay out of our party. You can go to hell." And that's how it went. And
that's how it went.
And the host tried to correct her, like slow her down, and she was like, "No, go to hell." And so you only have to look back to the last election when Donna Brazile herself was spilling all the beans about how they did this very same thing in favor of Hillary. And now she's upset because someone from the other side is saying the very thing that she said herself 4 fucking years ago. So Donna Brazile, shut the fuck up. Yeah. This is it's just one giant political theater. And if you can't see that, then you have, gosh, I feel sorry for you.
I believe, and this is something Martin Armstrong, who I read often, he called this a while back, but I believe this election cycle is the beginning of the end for the Democratic Party as we know it. I think, and I think it's overdue. And as somebody who agrees with, socially anyway, some of the Dems policies, fiscally, I lean more traditional Republican, gun rights, traditional Republican or libertarian. But, on some social issues, I definitely have some leanings on the left side, right? And so I welcome a teardown of a party that is as hypocritical as the right is. And I think it's time. And I think, there's some young people within that party that are polarizing, the AOCs of the world, the Julian Castros of the world, that have a lot to offer. And I think it's time to get done with the old guard. And the old guard just has to go. And I think Biden getting his ass handed to him by Trump, which is exactly what I think is going to happen. Regardless of what happens with coronavirus, to be honest with you. I think it'll be the final straw. I think people will realize this isn't it. This isn't it. We thought we had it in 2016 with Hillary. We messed that up. We thought we had it in 2020 with the stock market pulling back and coronavirus, and we had an opportunity. That didn't get it done. And, I hope the Republicans do an about face too, because the bottom line is, that party has just gotten in line behind Mr. Trump and decided they're going to kiss his ass all the way to a second term. And, that doesn't help even the constituency, right? The Republican voters that are suffering. I mean, there's unless you're wealthy, it's still tough out there for a lot of people. And there's not a lot being done by the right either for those people. And so, whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump, the better off amongst us are going to get tax cuts. The better off amongst us are going to get, a stock market that's artificially propelled and propped up. Everybody else is really going to have to work for it. And it was really interesting to me this week, coming back to the coronavirus panic that's going on, seeing a couple of traditionally Republican leaning people really start talking about how it'd be nice if we had healthcare for all. Yeah. Now we want free testing. Now healthcare for all makes sense. But despite that, they won't vote for it. We get the republic we deserve, people, as a society, as a collective. And it is what it is, right? In the words of Mr. Pesci and in The Irishman, it is what it is.
Look, Biden doesn't really have a great shot, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. But you're going to get a really good crop of candidates in 2024 on both sides, I think.
Agreed.
And we're not going to go into the fourth turning because we did that last week. But for a lot of reasons, you're going to get a good crop of candidates in 4 years, and the next 4 years are just going to suck. And to Biden, you watch, I've been saying this already, but you watch as there's fewer people on the stage and he gets a larger percentage of the spotlight to himself. The degenerative state of his brain, his capacity to think quickly and clearly and articulate that are going to come increasingly under fire. I could see it the other night. Even when he was reading off a teleprompter on Super Tuesday, he couldn't keep it together. There's just going to simply be too many moments between now and November when Mr. Biden is not going to have a teleprompter and he's going to show the United States really what's going on inside his head, and it's not coherent. I'm not saying he's not a good guy. I'm not saying he doesn't have great intentions. I'm not saying he hasn't been and isn't still a good politician. I'm saying he is not electable because of that.
I agree. I mean, if you watched the speech there, he confused his wife for his sister and looked puzzled. I don't know if you caught that. I mean, it's, Mr. Biden's time to be president, an effective president, a coherent president, I think has passed. Unfortunately, the alternative is you're going to get a president that isn't very much more coherent, though he plays it off a whole lot better.
But he's incumbent and has already run. Joe Biden has run for president 3 times, and this Tuesday was the first primary he's ever won. Correct.
So I think, the writing's on the wall. If you want to really simplify where this is going, that's where it's going, everybody. Oil was down almost 10% today, Nick. We haven't even talked about that. Again, speaking to how bizarre the world is right now. 10% move in one day. People are speculating that U.S. benchmark prices could fall towards the $30 level. Closed at 41.53 today. This after OPEC had what one of the members called the worst meeting in the history of OPEC, as Russia rejected a plan for additional output cuts. It's again, I hate to bring it back up. We went at length last week about the fourth turning, but you're seeing it in all the major institutions simultaneously. I don't know how much more we can continue to highlight the massive change that is happening. I don't know if it's like a big, massive ship, making a U-turn at sea where it's so slow and subtle that you don't really realize what's happening. But it's happening, people, and I hope I hope that everybody is paying a little bit of attention. And if you're not, I hope you start to and prepare accordingly, because again, these things don't happen calmly. And I think that, yeah, go ahead, Nick.
No, people see it. I mean, I've in the past week, I've started seeing more articles about how like doomsday prepping is coming back into fashion, and billionaire bunkers are having record sales. And,
billionaire bunkers, you fancy guy, you.
the New York Times had an article this week about this camp that you can go to here in Washington State, where they teach you to live entirely off the land. And I'm just going to talk about this for a second because I found it interesting. This lady here runs a rewilding property. And so her vision is to have this big ground, a couple of 100,000 acres. That's like this new commune where anyone can come and join, but you walk in naked and you have to live off the land. And it's called rewilding. And she thinks that in a couple of generations, there'll be completely wild humans living on this property. But in the meantime, of course, she sells classes to rich people about how to live off the land. And so
there's going to be bipolar people everywhere.
That's funny. And so, Apple, not executives, but higher ups at Apple and Google and people from Silicon Valley are coming to this camp, paying this lady to take these classes, how to, tan a deer hide with acid you make from tree bark and whatever, how to build a tent and how to filter water, all this stuff. And this one guy is saying, sorry, I found this article fascinating.
This is fascinating. This might come in handy.
This one guy was saying that he and his other Silicon Valley buddies who have been learning from this lady, they plan on doing this in the mountains in California, right? The Sierra Nevadas. They bought a big plot of land and they plan on rewilding themselves. These are like Silicon Valley tech guys, right? And so you talk about big institutions being in crisis and people looking at the other side of this thing. People definitely see it. Certainly Silicon Valley types. It was a college friend of mine, a New York ad salesperson, who sent me this article saying, we don't talk all the time, but she was saying, you were a few years ahead of the game. You're already out in Washington State with your property, right? So people in New York are starting to wonder now. Like, I've seen the tweets like, oh man, there's like 13 million people around. It's like, yeah, no fucking shit. There's 13 million people around. Anyway, I don't even know what we were talking about, but yes, it's a fourth turning, and you can see it in how people are trying to escape from the system through things as mundane as rewilding stories in the New York Times.
Do you think you'll be able to wear sexy Vixen vinyl at one of these places?
It could be like venison vinyl from my own land. I'll do like a venison patent leather corset.
And I, of course, bring up sexy Vixen vinyl because of Brit Hume's actually a preference, I guess, for outfits, right? And hey, kudos to him. Hey, I don't knock anybody's kinks as long as you're not intruding on no one else. Let your freak flag fly, right? You want to provide some context there, Nick? I know you caught that earlier this week. I thought it was hilarious.
Hey, I don't care what you do in your personal sexy time, but if you tweet it out publicly, you're putting yourself in the public realm to be made fun of for it. And so, Brit Hume, who was a Fox News anchor on Super Tuesday, took a screenshot of his computer, sort of like I was just talking about the election odds. That's what he was talking about. And he took a screenshot so he could tweet out the current election odds. Except that instead of just taking a screenshot of the election odds, he got the whole browser so you could see the tabs that he had open at the top. I don't know if you're a multiple tab browser, Gerardo. I'm a multiple tab guy. So
I am indeed with both hands.
Brit was just grabbing those tabs with 2 hands.
I have a mouse and a keyboard.
So obviously, in the age of social media, this image gets instantly analyzed, and people start looking at what other tabs this Fox News anchor has open. And he's got his bank account open. SunTrust is one of the tabs, and there's a couple of other news tabs. One about the coronavirus, and then there's one tab that says "Sexy Vixen Vinyl." And it didn't take long for the internet to figure out what exactly the Sexy Vixen Vinyl tab was for.
And what was it for, Nick?
One Google search will lead you to a page for Sexy Vixen Vinyl, which is indeed a pleather outfit, sexy time outfit for women that Brit Hume was obviously interested in looking at for some reason. Now, one, that's fucking funny.
It's hilarious.
Two, this is who millions of people are getting their Super Tuesday news coverage from. He's checking his bank account. He's maybe looking at the election odds, and he's also looking up Sexy Vixen Vinyl. So you got 1/3 of this guy's attention, America. That's your news people.
In fairness to Mr. Hume, his weekends might be funner than everyone else's, right? For all we know.
And he might be helping spread the coronavirus.
He might be helping spread the coronavirus. I want to talk juniors for a second. We've been shouting as loud as we could about Arturo Bonilla and Magna Gold, the president and CEO of Magna Gold, and how he the last 5 deposits that he developed, he was able to put into production. And I've called him the Michael Jordan of the junior resource sector, because he was looking for, that 6th chip, that 6th ring, putting his next deposit into production. And, he one-upped me. He just went out and negotiated a deal where Magna Gold becomes an immediate producer. And I thought it was extremely ironic that it's one of the properties that he and his team actually put into production in days past, the San Francisco mine in Sonora, Mexico. An absolute heck of a deal from the Magna side of it. I know that the San Francisco mine has had some issues. I am of the belief that the issues that have been had at the mine that led to higher cash costs than anticipated were as a result of a management team that wasn't as interested in sticking around for the long haul. That led to a lawsuit that is currently pending. And so the deal today where Magna Gold has announced the transaction, the acquisition of the San Francisco mine and a concurrent private placement, I think you worded it well, transformational in an update to your subscribers. And that's exactly what it is. It makes Magna an immediate producer. And frankly, I think they took it for a song. Can you provide some context on the terms of the deal so I don't keep ranting?
Oh, you know more than I do, but gosh, I just wrote it today. Let me close my eyes and look at the numbers in my brain for a second. 9.74 million shares, currently at 40 cents plus $5 million payable over the next 12 months, or the 12 months after the closing of the transaction, which is like, I don't know. I don't remember the exact number, but something like less than $10 million or something, right? For a, gosh, where do I want to go? For a mine that was the flagship asset of Aleo before they bought, and I learned all this today. Like, I didn't know any of this. I was just researching today. But Aleo had like an $80 million market cap with this asset before they bought the Florida Canyon mine from Rypatch Gold. And that's why I think, and I don't know, it sounds like you know more of the backstory, but that's why they took their eye off the San Francisco gold mine. And also the resources at the San Francisco gold mine were calculated at like $12.50 gold, right? And we know where the gold price is at now. And we also know that the mineralization is open on trend at depth. There's potential for higher grade stuff below the pit. We know that there's gold on the leach pad there. Leo was expecting to produce 12 to 15,000 ounces this year. And I was just tinkering around with numbers, like adding together market caps and dividing by the share counts and just back of the napkin, what could this go to, et cetera, when it opens back up. In multiple scenarios, I came up with a share price north of $1. I don't know if my calculator was broken or not, but
at the very least, I mean, we're talking 2.3 million ounces across, the reserve and the measured and indicated categories. I can tell you in my conversations with Arturo Bonillas that he believes the exploration upside is excellent, and he would know because, again, they are the team that put this into production. Here's some, they're going to raise some money. They're going to do a small financing at 35 cents, 0 warrant.
Still with no warrant. Yes.
Still with no warrant. And I'll speculate that once that transaction is closed and this acquisition is finalized, I think you're absolutely right. You're going to see much, much higher prices. The cash considerations that they have, they don't have to actually pay on for 12 months. So what's interesting to me is the cash flow from the gold on the leach pads is going to pay for the acquisition price.
For the mine, yeah.
For the mine. And Arturo and his team are
as well,
yeah. And then so Arturo and his team they're going to come in. I have all the faith and confidence that they're going to be able to implement an operational improvement plan that will significantly reduce the $1,700 cash cost that Aleo mentions in their website. I think those are going to be closer to $1,000 per ounce. And again, just congratulations to that team on a heck of a deal. Happy to be a shareholder.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to hammer the market cap and the share count too much, but even at 60 or 70 million market cap with less than 70 million shares out, that's $1 stock, and it's halted right now at 40 cents, right? I mean, it's pretty good.
Absolutely. So no, congratulations there. Nick, I can't let you go without your commentary on daylight time. I saw you tweeting earlier this week to the beast and the animals that don't get it right. Can you explain to us simpletons how we're supposed to act through daylight savings time?
You should just do ET and PT and CT all year long, and then you'll never be wrong. Eastern time, Central time, Pacific time. Because if you do EST, that means Eastern Standard Time, which we do in the fall and winter. But this weekend, we're all going to fast forward our clocks by an hour and wake up pissed off. And then we'll be in Eastern, well, some of us will be Daylight Time or Central Daylight Time, etc. Pacific Daylight Time, and that is PDT. So spring and summer, we're on Daylight Time, and fall and winter, we're on Standard Time. I just see it get wrong a lot, so I figured I would just give you a little lighthearted fact.
We appreciate the insights as always, Mr. Hodge. Breaking news, the South by Southwest Festival that I cited at the beginning of this podcast has now been canceled.
Drop it. That's how fast stuff's changing, though. That's how fast it's changing.
That's exactly how fast it's changing. I can tell you that the cancellation of that festival on the local level here in Austin is a big deal. There's a lot of restaurants, hotels, Airbnbs, ride-sharing services, strip clubs probably less so because of coronavirus, but that are really going to be affected by the cancellation of this festival. And again, I speculated at the beginning of this podcast whether or not it was the smartest thing in the world to have people from all over the world come to one central location. I'm glad they're canceling it. I think it's the safest thing for the local residents. And it's like you said, this is how fast things are changing, everybody.
Cowards. They should be ashamed. Paranoid.
That's all I got, Mr. Hodge. Do you have any insightful or positive stories, or do we just want to say goodbye and let people enjoy the rest of their week safely, hopefully? Wash your hands, everybody.
Wash your hands, get your rice, get your beans. Don't forget the toilet paper. It's often overlooked.
It is often overlooked, and when it hits the fan, you want to make sure you're prepared.
That's it.
I am Gerardo Del Real. This has been episode 60 of the Tejas episode of Bizarro World, along with my co-host, Mr. Nick Hodge. Nick, thanks as always. Thanks for the therapy session. Everybody have a great week out there.
Adios, Gerardo.
Adios, Senor Hodge.